optimizing for winning early in life is the worst thing, because winning is the worst teacher.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Data Scientist Show. Today, we have Greg Osuri. He is the CEO and founder of Akash Network. Akash Network, an open source decentralized cloud and peer-to-peer marketplace to buy and sell cloud computing resources and deployment platforms optimized for heavily distributed applications. Prior to Akash Network, Greg founded AngelHack, the world's largest hackathon organization with over 200,000 developers across 164 cities across the globe. At AngelHack, he helped launch several developer companies, including Firebase, which was acquired by Google in 2014. Greg launched his career at IBM and later designed Kaiser Permanente's first cloud architecture. As an expert in open source, distributed systems, and blockchain development, Greg was instrumental in the passing of California's first blockchain law, providing the first expert witness testimony at the Senate. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Eliana. How are you?
I'm good. All right, let's get started. So for Akash Network, why you say it's the Airbnb for the cloud? And can you just introduce to us briefly what is the Akash Network?
Sure. So as you understand the cloud, cloud is a data center, essentially hosting your data or your compute, right? The cloud computing layer, the infrastructure layer, is provided by companies like Amazon, Alibaba, Microsoft, and Google, right? They're essentially companies that own their own data centers or rent them, but essentially they control the data centers themselves and provide you a service. And whereas Akash Network, we do not own any data centers. We tap into unused compute capacity. So just like for example, if you go to Hilton, right? Hilton, if you if you consider Hilton to be Amazon, right? You have this consistent service. You go to any Hilton, you get the same exact breakfast, you get the same exact treatment. It's a consistent service. Whereas you go to, consistency is great for the kind of users that want that kind of service. But if you want to go something more exotic, like go to Airbnb, you can get a single bedroom shack at middle of nowhere, or you can get a 10-bedroom villa in front of a beach, right? The choice is so abundant for you. The diversity of supply is so abundant that you can get access to all these exotic data centers or exotic places that you weren't allowed to get access to from Akash Network. So Akash provides a very different viewpoint as to how we look at the cloud. And for us, if there is supply, if there is unused supply, we want to be able to leverage unused supply.
Cool. And you on your website, you mentioned you can run machine learning and AI applications on the Akash Network. So can you tell us, for data scientists, what is the benefit of using Akash Network for machine learning applications?
Akash can offer the same resources, same efficiency without sacrificing quality at a much significantly lower price, right? So if you like money, I guess Akash is a solution for you.
Yeah.
And also we're, right now Akash supports CPUs only, but in about 6 months' time, we'll start supporting GPUs. The work is underway. What that means is lower cost GPU-based compute. As you know, GPU is very, very expensive on the cloud. So any cost reduction, I think, is a big win for the data community, but data science community. So we are very excited, and there's a lot of ubiquitous GPUs around, right? So if you have something like Ethereum network coming off proof of work to proof of stake, unlocking all this excess supply for GPUs. If you think of electric vehicles that are sort of like, essentially GPUs on essentially data centers on wheels. Some of these cars have about up 6 to 7 high-end GPUs. That could potentially come on Akash. Today, I think Elon Musk introduced this whole notion of a bot, the Tesla bot, and that's sitting on like at least I would think 4 to 5 GPUs that'll be charged in the evening, and that has really not using those GPUs. Those could be on Akash, right? So I think we have a great future of unused capacity of the cloud capacity is on the edge, whether it's a robot or a car or a plane that can all come onto Akash in a permissionless manner.
Mm-hmm. And are you hiring? Are you trying to build a data science team within your company right now?
Yes, we are. We just starting to touch the surface of it. As you know, Akash runs on a blockchain. It's a very public blockchain, and we have enormous amount of data on the public blockchain that we can gain insights from. And we're looking at simple things like pricing, for example, right? How does pricing work in a free market system? It's not a fixed price; it's a variable price. To what kind of trends we're seeing, right? What kind of applications we're being deployed? Are they long-running applications or short-running applications, or are they and what is the timeline of these applications, the life cycle of the applications? How and when are they? How long do they stay online? What are the effects of pricing? I mean, as you know, Akash uses a token to pay for compute, and it's a volatile token. There's always adjustments of these volatilities. A lot of opportunity, I think, to analyze and learn from the data sets that we have, which is humongous, and it's growing really fast as well.
And for data scientists who want to get into the blockchain use cases, what are some advice you have for them? Like, what are something they should learn?
I think just dig into the blockchain, right? So what are some things you need to learn? I mean, it's not anything unique. There's an API usually, right? There's an API, which is a REST-based API, or it could be an RPC-based API. So if you know how to do Python, you should be able to be good of extracting data from the blockchain. And then you have your typical extraction tools that data scientists normally go for, right? There's nothing special per se that you need to learn.
Okay.
But I think in general, a good understanding of the data structure is important. The data structure of a blockchain is essentially a Merkle tree. A Merkle tree that, if you look at a blockchain, it's nothing but a key value pair database, right? If you really break it down, that's on a Merkle tree, right? So at any given time, there's a certain state, and that state can be mutated only with by writing blocks, writing over the state. So you never lose history of something on a blockchain, right? That's how the integrity is ensured. So understanding a Merkle tree data structure, understanding how to navigate the blockchain, I think is a great good start. And I think we have a humongous need for data scientists in blockchain, right? So that's a big missing piece. And I think if you look at, we started engaging with a few data scientists from Europe, and they came to us. We didn't go to them, so it's a lot of hustle that people go through. And we alone, Akash Network has grants programs. So we have up to $100,000 to be giving to developers that that contribute to Akash blockchain in any form, in any way possible. And I think you can come up with a proposal looking at a blockchain, looking at a data which is completely open, permissionless. Anyone can use it. And if you have an idea on what you can do, it could be a dashboard, it could be a visualizer, it doesn't really matter. If you have an idea on what way you can contribute, we will be more than happy to consider you for a grant. There is a website called Akashlytics. I think it's spelled out AKASHLYTICS.com. It's not our website; it's a community developed and maintained website that gives you analytics on top of Akash Network. It's actually pretty cool. It's not great because it's great in the sense that you can actually get a lot of data, but it can use a lot of improvement in terms of how the data is rendered. I mean, the graphs are not exactly smooth. So there's a lot of opportunity. I think we highly encourage people to come to our forum, forum.akash.network. And if you have an idea, write a proposal, and you'll have input, from team members. And I'm pretty active in the forum as well. So you can take feedback from community members, and if you have something of value, you can develop that in Akash and win a grant. You can literally start a career on Akash without even asking me.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. So what are some current proposal out there that you find very interesting?
There's one proposal for a new development of a dashboard. I think that's fun. There are several proposals for building UIs, user interfaces. And Akash is a developer first tool, and it's command line only right now. Actually, take that back. There are two user interfaces that are great, including the command line. The user interfaces are community developed user interfaces. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I think there's an opportunity for people to just deploy or start like platforms as a service where you can effectively offer a turnkey data science solution on Akash and charge money for it. There is a commercial opportunity there. So I've seen several projects that are truly open source projects that are, that'll be great on an open source cloud, right? So for example, you have something like Docker Hub. Docker Hub is a container registry for Docker. Right now, Docker Hub is hosted on Amazon, which is not open. So there is an open registry project that is hosted on Akash that serves Docker containers over. Because Docker being open source software, and I think open source software should be run on open source cloud, right? So there's a lot of that sort of like value alignment style projects that are taking on Akash. So lots of exciting proposals. We get a proposal or two on a daily basis, and I love reading different ideas on how people are using Akash, and yeah, please feel free to post a proposal that and I'll be more than happy to give you feedback.
Yeah, that's very exciting. And you mentioned someone on the forum published some analytics. What type of analytics or data they're publishing today about the network?
So today we have like daily AKT spend. AKT is a currency that that people use on Akash Network to exchange value, to pay for compute. Daily AKT spend, the trend line as to how that's growing. It's very fascinating to see that data for us. Deployments, total number of deployments, active deployments that are currently running. It'll be good. And we have, let me look at akashanalytics.com. We have an incredible amount of data there. And we have, let's see, compute usage, CPU usage, memory usage, storage usage. It'll be great to have free resources there. Yeah, we have all the data points. It'll be great to have actual AKT spend in dollar amounts, because it'll be good to sort of like take the historical data and see how much what the AKT value was on that particular day. Yeah, you get a dollar amount for it. That'll be a great addition to have. We have the need for, let's see, if you look at the graphs alone, you see this like very variable. I don't know if you're able to see this, akashanalytics.com. The graphs seem a little off. So I think obviously there is a data rendering error there. There's a calculation error there. It'll be great to see that smoothened out. And let's see. There is other elements such as, so Akash is locked up in certain accounts, right? So Akash token itself can be staked in the sense you can, don't want to get into too much details, but staking is a mechanism of locking and securing the network. Yeah, I'd love to know how much Akash tokens are staked. I mean, that's public information, but Akash, the way you pay for deployments is through an escrow account. So you pay to the escrow, and the escrow gets distributed to the ultimate player. I'd like to know how much AKT is locked up in escrows. So a lot of like insightful data I love to see on this dashboard.
Yeah, it sounds like if you have, for example, those data on the daily or weekly base, a data scientist can build a forecasting model to see, what it's going to look like next month, or also maybe there's some seasonality. Maybe people only want to use the network, just example, on Wednesday night, and then maybe the network can adjust some type of capacity around that. So yeah,
It's a very good point. The seasonality and also cohorts. Like I like to understand one of the valuable things is how much of workloads are compute heavy and how much are memory heavy. Yeah. In the future, how much will be GPU heavy, right? Or disk heavy, as a matter of fact, right? So a big challenge right now is our providers do not have firsthand information on capacity planning. So if our providers know that you have more compute heavy or if they know the ratio and the breakdown as to what type of workloads Akash is hosting, it'll be great for them to bring on that type of capacity and optimize their costs accordingly, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of that insight can be built into Akash Lytics. I think that's a good one.
Yeah. What are some other potential data science use case you can think of?
It'll be good to see how much Akash is being traded in exchanges. So we have decentralized exchanges like Osmosis, right? I'd love to see if there are any visual pathways from a user flow standpoint, like user purchased some AKT tokens on Osmosis, how much of that actually was used for deployment versus how much of that is actually used for trading, right? We'd love to see the deployment, go up in the sense that more activity on the platform, so we can optimize accordingly.
Yeah.
We'd love to see what channels people are purchasing the AKT from. Of course, you have centralized exchanges, but I think decentralized exchanges is also similar to Akash Network. These are based on blockchain. We'd love to see the pathways there. Which decentralized exchange is attracting more developers versus traders. Yeah, those are some of the things top of my head. I'm pretty sure if someone is interested in building on Akash, we'll get a decent phone call with the product teams and just hash out a lot of the requirements.
Yeah, that sounds.
What I just told you is like a good enough sort of like chunk to start off with.
Yeah, for example, you mentioned how can we increase the usage? Maybe someone can also do some causal analysis to see what are the factors that's important that has driven previous usage, right? And then we can in the future optimize on that. So
another very important another element I think data scientists can contribute to Akash is going a little higher level, right? So we have miners that essentially mine certain protocol. We have packet.cash, pkt.cash, which is a mining protocol, a crypto network that has a bandwidth heavy, bandwidth hard function. So the idea is miners, mine PKT on Akash, and there's a certain throughput for that PKT, and that PKT mine, the value should be higher than the cost they pay in Akash, right? Yeah. I'd love to see the profitability calculator for Akash for different protocols, right? So, we can run benchmarks, one-off benchmarks at random times to understand different profitability or whatever, because the prices fluctuate based on demand supply. It'll be good to have a near real time or some sense of a latest price performance data for higher level protocols. There's a whole business about that. I mean, imagine like if you can be like, hey, PKT is very profitable to run right now on Akash, and you can actually go mine PKT, and earn PKT based on that profitability calculator. I'm surprised no one has done that already. Yeah, it's actually a really good idea.
Really?
Yeah, it's a very commercially viable idea actually. If you can build a business, it's arbitraging, right? So you're like, well, if it's PKT, it's profitable to mine PKT because Akash demand supply goes up and down, and suddenly you have humongous supply that just comes and crashes the price for compute. That's when you jump, right? Jump whatever protocol is going to make you money. So yeah, there's opportunity there.
Yeah, that's a lot of interesting use case. So so for the listeners, if you have any ideas, you can write a proposal and then talk to the team of Akash Networks.
Yep.
So previously you mentioned something data science can start looking at is Markov tree. Do you have any books or resources you recommend for people to learn more about it, or they can just Google it?
Oh, Merkle tree. Merkle tree is a very common data structure. Git uses Merkle tree. So it's, if you do blockchain one-on-one, I'm pretty sure there'll be a gazillion results.
Let's talk about your career. So you started your career as an architect and then built Kaiser's first cloud architect. Can you tell us what was that experience like?
So I began my career not as an architect. I began a career as a programmer. And really, I started programming when I was 12.
Oh, wow.
And professionally means earning money while writing software since I was 16. I had my own business. I had a web development business. This is in 2000, 2000s. Building websites were very, very profitable. Everybody wanted, it's like blockchain now, right? Everybody wanted websites. If you knew HTML, you are like pretty good. And I was young, I was 16, and it was a lot of fun. In 2000s, I actually established a business. Really paid through college with that business, and professionally, I began my career as a consultant, to IBM. And IBM, it was pretty interesting experience because I was born and raised in India, and coming to US was, one experience all along. I never really worked in India. My first job was in the US, and I was as a consultant, I was traveling pretty much, right? So I was hopping from one company to another, wherever IBM wanted me to go. And I had an opportunity to see a diverse set of companies. I think that was very critical early in my career to see the diversity. A lot of companies sort of like that have different businesses and different models, different problems. Getting used to that diverse problem set was very enlightening because I learned quite a bit on scalability. I was first in certain software like IBM Integration Suite. At that point, there was, integration was a big deal. Certainly, IBM is a huge country, right? It's humongous. I don't remember how many people were working there. I think north of 500,000 people, 500,000 people in their company, right? My first Kaiser Permanente was way later. Actually, that's how I came to California, and that was more of like a company experience. So IBM was more of a consulting experience, right? So Kaiser gave me a very unique opportunity that I could. This is in 2008, right? So this is where I really had an opportunity to build the first cloud before cloud was a thing, right? So it was based on VMware. VMware was the virtualization software that was still pretty relevant, and it was back then very popular. And I came up with the idea of like using VMware to build a cloud infrastructure that's internal to Kaiser, and using that so that you can actually improve efficiency, use the boxes way better. And I stumbled upon this little thing called AWS back then. It was just a S3 API. They didn't really have anything else beyond S3. And EC2 came way later. I love the idea of using an API-based provisioning system. That was just fascinating. I knew this was going to be the future back then. So, S3 was great, and I wanted to build like a Kaiser internal, and they wouldn't allow us to use S3 at Kaiser, right? Using Amazon back then was like, no way in hell, right? If you use Amazon, you get fired.
Wow.
Now, if you do not use Amazon, you get fired, I suppose. But you know how things work.
Yeah.
We're seeing similar patterns with Akash, right? Nobody wants to use. I mean, not too many people know about Akash, but it's one of those things that takes time for technologies to really show their power. So after Kaiser, I really, that's when my real career began. I would say I worked for a bunch of startup companies in San Francisco. Scaling companies like Marketron, that was a leader in radio advertising, but really founded a company called AngelHack. So AngelHack began as a small hackathon-based accelerator. Essentially, hackathons were an underground concept back then. There were really slumber parties for geeks, right? So this is in 2011. Hackathons were very, very grassroots, low key. And I really understood the power of hackathons because for me, coming from India, I learned how to code. I didn't have a computer. I learned how to code with my friends and books, and
a
lot of knowledge that was shared knowledge in a social setting. So I understood the power of a shared knowledge in a social setting, and came to the US and noticed people here are a lot more introverted, a lot more closed off, right? So hackathons were a way for me to open them up and bring them outside their homes and connect people. And magic happens when you bring people together and connect them in a social setting, in a low pressure setting, right? And we did our first hackathon in 2011. It was a massive success. It was at the Adobe headquarters, and then it became very evident for us that bringing people together has great value.
Yeah.
And then we started doing these hackathons every 2.5 months or 3 months, right? And the second hackathon we did was again it was two separate cities, but word got around. Amazing companies started launching at AngelHack, because AngelHack is where you have all these developers come and hack, right? That's when a little company called Firebase, Firebase came. James Stamplin, who's CEO of Firebase back then, he's a founder. And there were 3 people in the company, and they came around. They were like, "Well, we really want to launch, launch an AngelHack," and they had a website with a password on it. Right? It was very early days. It was fascinating, and companies like that, several other companies would come to AngelHack and help. We would help them launch, get their first set of users, and get their first set of investments and whatnot. So that was a big eye opener for me. And one of the main things I saw there. So hackathons are essentially, an event, usually 24 hours, 36 hours event. You come there with an idea, and you can work on that idea, and in an amazing setting. Where you have food and all the resources you need to work on the idea, right? Even meet people that have shared similar interests. That could be technical, not technical, business people. It doesn't really matter. It's really where you come and even form companies, right?
Yeah.
It was an amazing setting for you to come and innovate. So hackathons I'm still a big fan of them. But one of the things there I noticed was, after people develop their software, deploying the software to the cloud was problematic, right? See, only option you had really was something like a Heroku, which was super simple and easy to use, but it wasn't very scalable, right? So there was always a big challenge and a compromise and a trade-off you need to make between scalability and usability. So that's when the idea for Akash Network today, or Overclock Labs, really came into notion that why can't we build something that's scalable and usable, right? Why is usability a compromise for scalability? So that's when the idea, that's when I stumbled upon this technology called Linux containers. Linux containers in 2013 were a very Google concept. Google was the only company that was mastering Linux containers. And containers solve a very important problem, which is parity problem in deployment. In the sense, like what you developed locally and taking that code onto a server, you don't have any difference. You can package your container here, you can with all the dependencies and push that to a server. That was not the case back then. I mean, right now it's obvious you use containers, right?
Yeah.
So I decided to focus on Linux containers. It was a very difficult thing to use, and Docker came along, made containers super simple. I was very fascinated by Docker, but Docker did not have fault tolerance on it. And Google wrote a paper called Omega on basically the notion of making Docker more fault tolerant. And I was fascinated by the paper. I started working on it. Then someone at Google showed me Kubernetes, which was a open source version of the internal tool Borg. This is in 2014 timeframe, and I was just blown away by Kubernetes to a point that I started like dropping what I was working on and started adopting and learn and contributing to Kubernetes, and formed a company, Overclock Labs, to take Kubernetes to market. And today, Kubernetes is used by 80% of the cloud. Just so you know, it's the most popular container orchestration tool out there, right? Back then, nobody knew what Kubernetes was. So formed Overclock Labs to take Kubernetes to market. Our idea was like, well, let's go build something that's scalable and usable. And one of the most scalable things you can do is move the data close to the user, right? So in close network proximity to the user, right? So that's how you reduce latency between the client and the server. So we really wanted to deploy near edge workloads using Kubernetes and containers, because containers are really good at moving code without, while having parity, right? And so we created a edge computing company, Overclock Labs. And as we were deploying this Overclock Labs, the software we made two different data centers around the world. What we discovered was most compute capacity in these data centers are unused, right? Because if you have a data center, you need to have peak capacity. You need to have peak capacity, and peak capacity comes in spikes.
Yeah.
You never usually have consistent capacity, right? If you're a retailer, your peak capacity is probably in the shopping season. If you're a tax software, your peak capacity is probably during the tax season, right? You have this inconsistent seasonal, peaks that you have to address for. That's why you end up buying a lot of hardware, but you don't use. So we identified this core sort of like inefficiency in the market. And that's when the idea for a marketplace came about, right? Because we had the software that would function across the globe. Doesn't matter what a data center you put it just works. And so we had the scheduling software. Now we needed a marketplace on top of that. And when we were designing this marketplace, it was very important for us that this software remains open. But the challenge of open software is sustainability. How do you sustain an open source company? That's really where crypto came along. Actually, crypto came a little before that. The blockchain came first before crypto for us. We started using blockchain because the data structure was very, very attractive, right? So one of the things blockchains allow is, as you know, in data science, we call immediate consistency, right? So immediate consistency is important for certain type of workloads, whereas blockchains are always immediately consistent. So you don't commit a transaction unless you have consensus across whatever consensus mechanism you use.
Yeah.
It's great for deploying edge-enabled workloads, because when you have to distribute your configuration across edge nodes, we kind of designed a very decentralized system using Merkle tree as the data structure and a BitTorrent style replication structure, right? So when you put BitTorrent and Merkle tree together, you end up with a blockchain. So we accidentally created a blockchain. We didn't really start off with a blockchain in 2016. And then the cryptocurrency came around because we had to secure the blockchain. The option really were proof of stake and proof of work.
Yeah.
Proof of work wasn't very scalable, so we went proof of stake. And for proof of stake, you needed a token. It turns out this token also has amazing properties such as sustainability as an economy. Then we ended up creating a token economy based on Akash Network. And today the economy is about $1.2 billion in value for Akash Network. And the token is being used daily to pay for cloud computing on the network.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. Thanks for sharing your whole career story and where you got your inspirations. So it was really cool that you worked as a consultant in IBM. You got to travel. And then you mentioned that you learned a lot from different companies you worked at. So for data scientists and software engineers today, if they want to become an entrepreneur like you, do you think it's still valuable today to try to become a consultant, or what are some other ways they can learn about different industries?
Well, so there are multiple ways to success. There's no one way, right? Just because you're consulting, or just because you work at a startup or a big company, that doesn't mean that you cannot do what you want to do, right? So yeah. I think the trick is in embracing our past or embracing our experiences to move forward, right? But if I were to do it again, if I were to redo my life, I would most certainly choose to work at a startup, right? So the way I look at these things is the higher chances of failure there is, the higher chances of growth you get.
Yeah.
It's risk reward, right? The more risk, more reward, right? So if you choose a career, if you are where you're 50% likely to fail, like if you go to a startup, right? Startups are very, very hard because you're expected to do things that you don't normally know how to, or you have to learn on the job a lot more than a big company, right? And your chance of failure is very, very high, right? So when you have a high chance of failure, you have a high chance of growth because you're going to learn a lot from failure, right? So I would optimize for hyper growth in early days. If I want to optimize for hyper growth, I would choose high risk careers.
Mm-hmm.
The careers that you may not have a job when you start, right?
Yeah.
I've noticed generally those kind of careers give you highest growth. Instead of something like my career, consulting is the least sort of like, not least risk, it's still risky more than a big company, working at a big company, right? Somewhere in the medium risk category, right? But I mean, the chance of failure is pretty high because you have no idea what customer you go to, right? You don't have no idea whether you can solve the problem or not, right? The chances of failure is very, very high. And as a young consultant, I was being sent to places where older consultants didn't want to go.
Oh, okay.
Because, a customer might be difficult or a customer may not be happy, right? So you needed a punching bag, right? So I was set up for failure a lot.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the reasons I was able to grow very quickly. So in that high failure, high growth mode, I would choose startup companies, right? Startup companies where you have a great manager. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. Do not ever work for a bad manager because that would be a death to your career, especially in the early days, right?
Yeah.
The early days, you really want high risk. So either consulting or startup companies, I would optimize for.
Yeah.
And I would not optimize for big companies, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned a lot of times when you're a consultant, you were set up for failure. So can you share, like, what are some, failures that you learned a lot of lessons from?
Oh God, I don't know how much of it I'm allowed to say because a lot of these you'll be surprised how big companies mess up, right? What was I set up for? Specific examples? Let me see. I don't know. Generally speaking, I think like big companies are very, very, very slow to move, right? So there was this one time, I'm not going to name who it is. It's a gigantic healthcare company. People know who it is. IBM was selling an amazing suite of products back then around services-oriented architecture. So you hear this microservices, this term, that's not new. That was an old term repurposed. Right. The original term was services-oriented architecture. I'm talking about 2008, like 12 years ago, right? It was a big vision for IBM to essentially take all these diverse set of siloed systems, like mainframes, like, arcane massive computers written on arcane software like SAP or whatever, or TIBCO, whatever, right? Take all these business functions and make them services and expose them so that these services can be composed. And they introduced this product called, I'm blanking, forgot the name, but they introduced this very high risk product. Yeah. This was supposed to be a flagship customer. That project began as a 6-month project, and of course, it ended up being a 2-year project. Lot of sunk costs because the product was not very, very great, right? Like it did work in like a proof of concept setting, but when you actually put that into production, it just had all kinds of problems. Yeah. So there was and IBM and big companies in general are known for like taking all these like narratives, right? The services-oriented architecture or microservices and blowing them out of the proportion, overblown utility, right? Because you always think about like, I mean, that's just marketing people talking. So I think just like confusing hype with actual reality and living your own hype, I think was the biggest failure, right? Yeah. So now biggest lesson for me from there was like, well, you can hype your hype, but end of the day, the product, if you're not grounded in reality, you're never going to succeed. The worst part was that hype was so much that all of us kind of had to believe and drink the Kool-Aid. Yeah. Right. So when you when the reality came out, the product was really bad, right? So it would have been different if we knew the actual product, the functionality of how bad the product was before we went to the customer, so we can actually plan around it. So I think just grounding yourself in reality and not drinking the Kool-Aid is very important. So now when I talk about Akash, and I'm very, very vocal, very clear. I mean, fortunately, we have a lot of data that's public. Everything we do is public. So we have radical transparency there. We can't hide. We don't, like if you go to Akash Analytics, you'll know exactly how much money we made at every given hour, right? So that makes things a lot more simpler. And all our code is open source, right? So I'll rather prefer, now I'm so truth oriented, right? That I'd rather be radically transparent and ground myself in reality. So now we know what actually moves the ball and makes progress. Right? So if that helps.
That's great. Yeah, that's great advice. And then you also mentioned you recommend people to work in a startup, take risks. So a lot of startups, sometimes they fail. Some startups have a lot of chaos. So for someone just started their career, what are some things they could look out for if they want to find a good startup, good manager to work for?
Startups are organized chaos. That's what they are. They're chaos. Without chaos, you don't have startups.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. It's beautiful to embrace the chaos and to really understand and not freak out, right? Without startups fail. There's high failure rate. If you're afraid of failure, you're never going to grow, right? So that's why you got to work for a startup, not because you're going to succeed, because you're likely to fail, and you are through that failure, you're going to learn a lot.
Yeah.
Right. Optimizing for winning early in life is the worst thing, because winning is the worst teacher.
Yeah.
Failure, on the other hand, is an incredible teacher. I know it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But I've learned a lot more during failures than successes, to be honest with you. And the chances of you winning in a startup is probably less than 1%.
Yeah.
But when you win big, right? You win really big. The risk reward ratios are phenomenal, right? So the reason why you want to fail early is because failure when you get older is a lot more painful, right? So I'd rather fail early than fail later in life. Or when I reach to a stage, I want to be in a mode of embracing this failure, understanding failure, living with failure. I think that's really the key to success.
Yeah, I love that. You learn the most from failure, and don't optimize your career just for the success in the beginning. Yeah, I think
so you learn how to fail less over time, and eventually you'll succeed. Right? Some do it faster, some do it slower. Like even with companies, right? When you start companies, it's not about trying to win the first time. It's about, you raise money or you have X amount of resources, right? It's about what can you do with those resources in terms of how many experiments you can really do, right? So when you start a company, you have a hypothesis. You have a hypothesis that customer X would love value Y, right? Some hypothesis for you to actually earn money, right? When you have a hypothesis, you approach the hypothesis from a scientific angle, and you have a series of experiments you design with the resources that you have at your disposal, and take a methodical, a diligent approach to experimentation, validation or invalidation of a hypothesis, and you move on. If anyone's interested in this model, it's called Lean Startup model. So Lean Startup is an amazing framework on how do you sort of go about navigating failure and embracing failure to succeed.
So when you work for a startup, say you learned a lot, you fail, you succeed, and when do you know whether you should stay or leave a startup?
Good question. Like startups only fail when they close down. You can, I've been through numerous situations where it was difficult to fundraise, even with Akash and Overclock Labs. When I began the company, it was difficult to fundraise. So I could have given up, or I could have continued doing it. So if you continue and if you do not give up, you tend to eventually win,
Yeah.
right? So is it healthy? Probably not, right? Is it optimal? Hell no, right? So we had several instances, a lot of folks left the company in early days that, for various reasons, primarily money, right? Money was running out and startups go through these crazy times.
Yeah.
And, obviously we had a slump and got a bump, and now it's $1 billion company. Network. So folks that actually contributed in early days to Akash lost upside, right?
Yeah.
Lost the tokens that they could have gotten if they stayed on. And a lot of them come back and be like, hey, we want to, reconsider, but then that boat has sailed. So when is it okay to leave a startup? I don't know, to answer. I don't think there's a definitive answer when it's okay, other than the fact that, of course, if it's abusive environment, like you're being abused and taken advantage of, I mean, you got to leave the startup, right?
Yeah.
If your manager is abusive, you're just not seeing the growth from your manager, you should leave. It's all about the manager, whoever's managing you, right?
Yeah.
And you do not ever leave a startup because they're running out of money, unless you have responsibilities that you cannot fulfill, right?
Yeah.
You may have obligations that you absolutely need money for. But generally leaving a startup for money reasons or joining a startup for money reasons is a bad idea, both.
Yeah.
So we generally reject candidates that have multiple job offers, one guy paying much higher than the other, like us. We recently had a great candidate who was like, yeah, the other person's paying a lot more money, base salary, but I'm like, how much upside are you getting?
Yeah.
And not much upside. I'm like, well, you're not going to work out for us.
Yeah.
We're not going to pay. We're probably going to pay you half what the person's paying, but the upside is so high that you got to make a decision. I'm like, so a lot of people do not ever work for something for money. That's just the wrong way to do it. That's what I learned. Yeah. So when do you leave a startup? I think when it becomes abusive, your managers become, you reach a point of like, a burnout. A burnout is not working too much. Burnout happens when you are working a lot, but the results or the outcome is not ideal. That's when you call it burnout, right? You can work forever. If the outcome, you're winning, you don't burn out. But if you're failing, that's when you burn out. And that's what makes, I think, like what you do in your burnout is what determines your growth and your trajectory, right?
Yeah.
So when is it a good time to leave a startup? It really depends. Really depends on a lot of factors. There's no definitive answer, but I do know it's never for money.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then you said what you do when you burn out is very important. So what should people do if they keep working on something, but they keep failing, it's not working?
I would be a terrible advisor to that because I don't ever give up, right? And that worked out really well in my life.
Yeah.
So I somehow tend to find a way out of the burnout, right? Taking breaks, do whatever you do to reduce your stress, right? There's a lot of mental help. I think as founders, we should get, and I got incredible help from coaches, therapists. So a lot of like mental reinforcement of this thing. And I think I just seeked help that I could get, and that helped. That mental help really helped a lot for me to come back during burnouts. I had some health issues because of startups, because of this thing I was doing. So I scaled back in terms of the mode I was operating in. Before it was a lot about just powering through like 20-hour days, 16-hour days. 16-hour days were a common theme at Overclock, but now we are so different as a company. Now there's an enormous focus on sustainability, right? So I wish I learned that sustainability before when we started the company, but eventually, I mean, we learned it the hard way, but we learned it eventually. now the mode is to really do be a lot more disciplined in how you spend your time.
Yeah.
It's not about doing a lot of things, for us at least. I mean, people have different ways they look at the world. The way we look at the world is pick few things to focus on and only do those things.
Yeah.
Do not try to do everything, right? Do not try to get like enormous. Just people optimize for doing a lot, and people think you're working, and you'll succeed. No, pick the most impactful things, because you can only do few things and you can do them well, right?
Yeah.
So we believe in concentration versus diversification.
Yeah.
In terms of your time being spent.
Yeah.
And they're also like translated to how I invest. I don't now invest in like lots of things. I invest in very few things, but I invest a lot in few things. I concentrate instead of like diversify.
Yeah. And sometimes there's a like temptation on the things that you decided not to work on. I think it's also important to know when you say no to the things you deprioritize, although they're interesting, but make sure you don't work on that, because they're going to take away your time and energy to work on the things you really, really want to work on.
Yeah, I think it was Steve Jobs that once said, the hardest thing is saying no. Focus is about saying no to great ideas.
Yeah.
Right? Like we have great ideas, and you need to be disciplined to say no, not now.
Yeah.
And stay focused.
Right.
And if you plan your life around, it really doesn't matter what your living situation could be. You can plan your life to stay focused on few things.
Yeah. That's very powerful. And previously you mentioned you started AngelHack because you want to create this community for people to meet, network, and find ideas from each other. So now, with the restriction of COVID, what are some ways that engineers and data scientists can network and get inspired from a community?
I find Twitter to be the most valuable networking tool in the world. Twitter is a very underrated BD or business development tool, I would think. I think you can gain a lot by learning by learning from people that are smart on Twitter, right? It's a gateway, certainly, a gateway to building communities. I met almost all people that receive grants from Akash on Twitter.
Wow.
I met, almost all people. I'm very active on Twitter. I have a lot of business that I do on Twitter that people reach out to me because I said something nice about somebody, or I genuinely express my opinion about a network. People tend to listen a lot better on Twitter than elsewhere. So I find Twitter to be extremely valuable networking tool. And I don't do physical networking anymore, very little, unless it's very valuable to me and it's in a very intimate setting that I would come. But I generally avoid networking events. Partly
Why
because
is that?
I get pitched a lot. A lot of people come and pitch me,
Yeah.
which is, it's not a bad thing. I understand. I mean, I was there, but there's no filter for quality. Folks, right? That's big reason, right? I invest in companies. I like to get pitched, but then the types of companies that I invest in, I want the filter criteria to be stronger, and I just don't think it's a good use of my time. It's just you don't know who you're talking to. It's random people, and you got to be mean to them. You can be polite, but most people are not polite and whatnot. So. I prefer meeting people on Twitter a lot better.
Yeah, because you can see their profile, they link their previous work, right? You can get to know them better before you talk to them. Correct.
And we can always follow up on a phone call. And actually end up meeting a lot of people I meet on Twitter in real life, right? Because I would continue the conversation in real life. So I find online social media channels to be very, very effective. Every network has its own mechanics as to how they engage people. So you can do Reddit, you can do, all kinds of things.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So for people try to talk to you on Twitter, what are some tips of that's helpful for them to, get your attention?
Well, be authentic. I don't like, I mean, if you are going to reach out to me, don't just come and say hi. I don't respond to hi, how are you? I'm not going to engage with you in small talk, right? Have something of substance. Something that I enjoy, like if you see my Twitter, is going to be all about Akash Network, right? So I'm very heavy on Akash Network and blockchain, and I'm very focused on those topics, right? So engage with me in those topics, and I'll be, if I find something interesting, I definitely engage back, right? I think that's with anybody you engage with, right? Don't go to them without substance, right? Usually I turn my head if you deployed something in Akash, and if you shared your experience on how you deployed. It could be a simple blog post, could be honest opinions, right? That's very important. Honest critical feedback is very, very important. Things that I admire. Authenticity and honesty are very key drivers, right? Or you could even make a meme. Memes are fun, like something that whatever you are, if you're a funny person, I think memes are great, right? There's this beautiful video by like recently my new friend that I made on Twitter. I don't know his name. He goes by Coney Daddy. I think his name is Ian. He goes by Coney Daddy. His Twitter handle is Coney Daddy. Is hilarious. He's a comedian from LA, and he made this beautiful video about Cosmos ecosystem and pinged me to make him famous, and I retweeted, and he's got hundreds of likes after that. And then he made another video, and I'm like, wow, this guy is amazing, and I started following him, and he made a video about Akash, which is really funny as well. So that's someone who's funny, who has an idea about what he's talking, but he presented in a very delightful way. And I think he's coming to San Francisco soon, so we're going to meet up. And nice. I even sent him money. I sent him like 500 AKT.
Oh wow!
I 500 AKT is about $1,500 or close to $1,800. I sent money $1,800 to someone I have no idea who they are. So so Twitter does sort of like has that ability to make real good friends, and not only me, right? Like any blockchain CEO, I think we have a huge war chest that we can distribute people.
Yeah, that's amazing. So going back to how you started to learn programming, you said in India, the communication or community is very open. It's very easy to work with a lot of people. Can you tell us a little bit? So what got you into programming when you were 12? How did you learn it with your friends?
Well, I grew up on a farm in India. It was a village, right? So you really have nothing else going on in life, And for me, it was a few things. I think it was games that got me into like playing on a computer. And this is the era, this pre-3D games, right? These are all 2D games, right? You have Dave, you have Mario, you have Prince of Persia, and these are like really old, DOS-based games. This was even before Windows was even a thing, right? Windows didn't exist back then, at least, right? It's 94, 95. And I really got into, I didn't have a computer, so my friends had computers. So I would go and play at my friend's house, and I would play a lot of games with different people, houses, right? And I wanted to keep all these games. I wanted to actually show my other friends what other games they have, right? So I became like this. So I would carry a bunch of floppy disks. Floppies, are these storage devices. They're like USB drives, but old school floppy disks. And I would copy these games into these floppy disks from one friend's house and take it to other people's houses and play that way. But these games were larger than they could fit in a single floppy disk. So you had to break that game, like that file, into multiple smaller files and store them on different floppy disks, because each floppy could only support 1.2 megabytes of data, right? So I had this big set of floppies. I would just put it on my bike and go. And the process of breaking that big game into multiple disks and integrating them back into a single game was tedious. I think that's my first real program that I wrote to simplify my life. So I had this code that would just do the assembly and disassembly of these games. I like to call that my first distributed computer. But I think solving my own problems was what got me into thinking that you can actually use computers to solve your own problems.
Yeah.
Then I started seeing other problems with my friends' businesses or things that I could use software to solve, right? So software for me, and still until date, is a solution problem solving mechanism. It's means to an end. You're always solving a problem, right? So that was very attractive to learn as a 12-year-old, that you can actually use computers to solve problems. And best thing is they'll pay for it, right? When I was 14, I was like, well, you paid, I got money making this. And the 14-year-old getting money is a big deal, right? So I think the best thing that could happen to me when I was a child was my passion and my hobbies became commercially viable. And not only viable, extremely profitable.
Yeah.
And so that once you set me on that path, it was just never turning back. I only had one career in my life. That was besides my photography career, but that's more recent.
We'll talk about that later. Yeah, that's really cool. And then you mentioned when you moved to the US, you feel the community in the US is not as open as in India. So what, if you compare the culture in India and the US, what type of culture you wish people live in the US, specifically in tech, can adopt more?
India was, at least where I grew up, I mean, it's different. I think it's pretty much similar now in the cities, whether in the Western cities or Eastern cities. Things have changed quite a lot from the India that I was used to.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you can, the same case in China as well, right? Things have developed a lot in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And so what I really admired in those days was the social element of interaction.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a very communal feeling about something. There was genuine sort of like interest in helping people.
Yeah.
Not because you're making money or something, you're just helping people.
Yeah.
And if you are a novice, right, if you don't know things, you can actually go to places where people would congregate on these interests. Computer clubs, right? I was part of a computer club. And I would make friends there, usually older kids, much older than me.
Yeah.
And they would be open to sharing the knowledge. Because this was before the internet, right? Before you could get any knowledge and you needed a book. I mean, only way to get them is through books. And I didn't have money to buy books.
Yeah.
Right. So I would borrow books from different people and I would learn how to code using a book and a pen and paper. And I mean, eventually computers, and then I would write my programs in the night and I'd go to this lab in the morning and I write the programs back on a computer. That's how I would validate my computer. But I knew programming like on a book, right? It's like a math. And a lot of that knowledge was given, like shared with me by my friends and older kids, right? So, well, in the US, we're a lot more behind the screen, at least. I mean, I think it's just not US. I think as internet became a thing, people discovered you don't need to go to physical places anymore to gain knowledge. You can pretty much do anything on the internet, right? So the sense of community, I think, has changed, right? From a physical being to a virtual being.
Right.
And I love to see that actually as like virtual communities that are a lot more immersive. I think the metaverse idea of like really being very immersive and involved community could be a great thing as we move to a more virtual world. But I'd like to see more communal efforts in Western cultures more than isolated cultures, right?
Yeah.
And we're seeing this in India as well. So in India, you get into cities, you have this like more isolated modes, right? So yeah, it's not a Western problem anymore.
Yeah, I remember when I grew up in China, I know all my neighbors. I just knock on their door, I play with them, and everybody. But now, if I tell you, hey, I actually met my neighbor in the elevator, it's like a story to tell.
Yeah.
So definitely miss the community of in our current society. So how do you think we can change that?
I don't think it's something that you and I, or in general, like we as humans, um, are it's more of a societal thing, right? Like, how do you
Yeah.
change? It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to be isolated. I think, I mean, reverse. And it's not a bad thing to stay in your home, right? It's a bad thing not to interact with other
Right.
people,
Yeah.
right? How do you change that? Is like, well, we have more attractive societies, right? Like during COVID, we all noticed that, well, you couldn't go out at all, right? So people embraced online communities. Um, I I'm also I'm not a big fan. I was on New York Times, talking about talking about how the experience of online communities, and I got in New York Times because of a tweet I wrote. And the tweet I said, well, relationships are not nurtured over breakout rooms in bars. Sorry, breakout rooms on Zoom, but back room conversations in bars.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm a big fan of embracing physical space and physical social activity in a physical space versus a virtual space. Now, I'm not denying virtual spaces can be powerful. We're not there yet, right?
Yeah.
Zoom call is not a replacement to a setting in a bar, right? So how do we like? But I think well, going out all the time is not very productive either, right? So I think embracing online communities, making them a lot more immersive, could actually result in a lot more people in physical space interacting, right? I think these are going to go hand in hand, right? So like me, I meet people on internet, on Twitter. I meet people in real life, but I think most new people I meet is on Twitter because I'm working a lot, right? I'm sitting here on Twitter a lot. So, and the people I meet on Twitter usually end up being super cool in real life.
Yeah.
Right. And they may not be the type of people that would come out a lot and to a bar, but they would come out if they know who they're talking to. Right. So I met amazing people online that ended up being really cool offline. So I think a system that embraces online community and extends that experience to offline communities, we got to look at what's good that's working online and what's not working online, and what's good and that's working offline is not working offline, right? So taking the best of both worlds, I think, is key, and that's why I'm really sort of like bullish on metaverse, right? The idea of like creating virtual communities a lot more immersive. I personally invested in a few metaverse companies, and I'm looking forward to a good future in that embraces virtual communities.
That's very exciting. So we talk a lot about your career. I'm curious, what do you spend a lot of time when you're not working?
I'm an aspiring photographer, but I'm so a big challenge with careers and hobbies is if for me, the company Akash Network was one time a hobby, right? It was not my full-time job. I had a job, and I was not sort of like working on it full-time, but this is what I wanted to do in my part-time, right? So I didn't really, my only hobby back then was programming. But then your hobby becomes your career. So then you become very uni-focused. So that is generally bad because you want something that you have to put your mind on that's not your work, right? So you can have the diversity in thought. So I tried every hobby that on the book, and it wouldn't stick because most hobbies expect me to leave, go out of my way, right? Except for photography. Photography is one of those things. As a creator, I really enjoy creating things. And it's one of those hobbies where I don't have to go out of the way. I can have a camera with me all the time. You see me anytime you see me, you generally see me with the camera. And I'm always taking pictures, and like I'm embracing where I am without going out of my way. I find those hobbies to stick around. And I, started investing a lot of time and energy and money into photography.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that really, I see a career path, a second career for me in photography, and I absolutely enjoy. And I think to answer your question earlier about burnout, and I think photography had a very important part of my recovery, because if I'm failing at my work or my startup, right, I can take up a camera and win at it. I can have a win. I can have a sense of like accomplishment, right, with my camera, and the results are almost instant, right? I mean, I was doing film, but results don't take months by the time you know what's working.
Yeah.
So I think photography helped me a lot during my dark days to come out of it. And it was also a beautiful tool for business development, because people will take meetings with me because they know they're going to get a good picture at the worst, right?
Yeah.
They don't see value. So I would, it was definitely a great win all around. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So when you're taking pictures or when you're editing pictures, how does those experience make you feel?
I feel photography for me was, as a growth-oriented person, I enjoy anything that I feel like that I grew, I learned, right? So I call this the growth gratification, right? It doesn't matter whatever you pick. If you're growing, if you're learning, that excites you and keeps you growing and growing and growing, right?
Yeah.
So photography is a platform, right? There's no one way to do pictures. There are a million ways you can take pictures.
Yeah.
There are millions of, thousands at least of cameras and lenses and film and like combinations that you can use, right? I'm not at a stage where I can comfortably say I have a style and I'm going to stick with it. Okay. I'm not biased. I experiment with a lot of different styles, and it's very inherent part of why I'm doing photography. I'm not doing photography to get published or to become famous, right? I'm doing photography to learn for my own satisfaction. Yeah. So I do photography for myself, right? I don't do photography for others. That's why I never charge for a photo session. Yeah. Because then I'm obligated to fulfill someone's expectations, right? I don't want to be in that position. I don't want to be told as to what my picture should look like. That's why I never charge for pictures. I charge only when I sell them after, right? And people like my work and they buy, right? So it's a form of art for me. And so I feel fulfilled, accomplished. If I'm tired of something at work and I stop that and I edit a bunch of pictures, I feel the fulfillment. I'm like, oh, I turn this knob and increase the tint here, or like reduce those highlights. That actually makes this picture look wonderful, right? Like, so you learn a lot, and in those small wins end up actually becoming a lot more satisfactory. Overall, I think it's great. And I highly recommend people pick up a hobby, a creative hobby, where you're growing, you're learning from that growth, right? As a creator, for me, growth was very important. It's a new field that I enjoy doing. I mean, I've been doing it for about 2.5 years, but there's not a single day that I hated taking pictures.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So you mentioned you like to learn and grow with this hobby. Are there some inspirations or learnings you got from photography that you have applied to career or life in general?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I actually have this whole series on photography. Now I'm doing like large projects in photography. I'm doing like 500-page books and whatnot. When I began, I was taking pictures of my girlfriend back then because we were living together. So I was just taking a lot of her pictures. But then I started this series called People That Inspire Me. Yeah. Essentially, it's a series for that I would take someone's picture and I would write something about them that inspired me, that forces me to learn about them, right? Like, I guess how you're doing your podcast, you're actually learning quite a lot when you're doing this podcast. So there's this growth gratification, right? That I actually really, really enjoy. So I started getting more curious about people when I was taking pictures, right? And I think the genuine curiosity in other human being without expecting anything back, was a key driver, a big takeaway for me in business. So when I approach, they say businesses give or take, right? Sure, absolutely, but it's not transactions all the time. It's relationships, and relationships usually begin with are best when there's least expectation from other people, right? So I take a very photography approach to business as well, and I tend to embrace the moment. I tend to embrace that human, element to business, and I expect least from other people, and usually it works out better. The more you give, the more you get, generally, and it works out really well. And I've seen that happen to me every day.
Yeah, that's great. So what are something in life or your career right now that you're very excited about?
I'm excited about a lot of things. Can't pick one or two. I am excited, or three, right? I'm really excited about balance, I think.
Balance.
Right? Yeah. I'm at a stage in career where I think, fortunately, I don't have to put in the midnight oil. And we do when we have to, but I think ultimately figuring out how to live with the right amount of balance, right amount of fun, right amount of work, right amount of family and hobbies and your personal time, right? How do you balance that out? And are a big sort of like a mode of working for us is sustainability, right? So if you cannot sustain doing all the things that in your life, it's not probably a good thing, right? So like I have so many things in life, I have to figure out a sustainable way. So I'm really right now about scaling the team, scaling the company quite a lot. We're hiring quite a lot. And the idea is, well, we can bring in amazing people and delegate a lot more work, get a lot more done without killing yourself, right? So I'm really in this path of sustainable growth. And I don't really like big surprises. I don't really like big hypes, that the stress that comes with it. For me, it's about doing small things every day consistently, right? Because when you grow small amounts every day, you realize growth actually compounds.
Yeah.
Right. And when growth compounds, it's a very powerful thing. So it's not about putting all your eggs in one basket and just going full throttle. It's about small amounts of progress every day, consistently. And that's very important. Consistency is very important. And in order for you to be consistent, you can't ignore other things in life. And you got to bring those things in life and balance it out. Once you have a perfect balance and consistency, and you will grow beyond your even you'll grow way beyond than what you originally intended. Before, the mode was I would work 20 hours, 16 hours, whatever, and I would go on for like 5 days and I would crash. After that, crash and burn. Maybe I'll stop working for a week because I'm so burnt out, right? But instead, if I work 6 to 8 hours every day consistently with a lot of discipline, I make a lot more progress end of 2 weeks than I would have made working 20 hours a day. So that big realization, I think, was very key for me. And I'm genuinely excited about, Akash Network and the things people are building, like, permissionless mode of innovation, right? You have self-driving vehicles that'll start using Akash, and you'll start, you have all these amazing things to look forward for, right? So overall, I think we are in a big paradigm shift from centralized architectures to decentralized architectures from a technological landscape. And I'm just super excited to be contributing and leading these efforts.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. And then before we wrap up, are there anything else you would like to share to the data science community?
Yeah, I mean, please feel free to reach out to me. My Twitter handle is Greg Osuri, GREGOSURI. I'm very active on Twitter. Twitter is probably the easiest and quickest way to get a response from me.
Yeah.
And start checking out. I mean, there's a lot of activity. I'm very my Twitter's content is primarily blockchain and crypto, and it's a lot of activity, and there's a big need for data science, expertise in crypto. And I highly recommend people to come and, start contributing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't need anyone's permission to contribute. This is an open system, right? You don't need, it's not a company that you go talk to, right? There's no API key, right? You can all read this data and just like put yourself out there, and people notice, right? If people don't notice, ping me and I'll make you famous if you want. But but generally, I mean, I'm not the only one that is putting ourselves out there, and a lot of crypto CEOs are pretty active on Twitter. So I highly recommend people to get involved and reach out to people on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And I also remember what Greg said. Don't just say hi. Don't just say, how are you? Don't just do small talk. Have some content.
I mean, there are very few things I hate in life, and small talk is one of them.
Yeah. What are the other things you hate?
Well, let's not go there.
Okay. So thank you so much to be on the show and for sharing your career story and advice. It's very fun. I'm very excited to see what are the next step of Akash Network.
Thank you, Daniela.